So incentives can be a touchy topic. I do see more and more people offering incentives like, well, if you participate, then you'll be entered in a raffle to win a gift certificate or a gift card. And depending on how much you could get, that might drive people to participate. So, yeah. I have to see if I can find literature on the other issue. Okay, so what to do? Transform the data. One thing you can do, you can, there are different kinds of regressions. We haven't really looked at any other than the standard least squares version, but you can use weighted techniques. Now, those will take a little bit of research to figure out what the weighting should be. But basically what happens with these is you apply a weighting factor to different groups so that you can take care of differences and variances. But I've never actually had to use those. I played with a sample data set a few years ago just to try to understand what it was doing, but it is one potential. Or you can use different non-parametric tests, because those are less upset by variance problems. Now, next one is outliers.
Yay.
That little comic I had at the very first start out was about outliers. Well, here we have scores that are very different from the rest of the sample. And when that happens, we have to ask ourselves some questions. Well, is this person just very different from the rest of the sample naturally? And that difference needs to be included in the study? Or is this person someone who just was trying to mess with the results, or didn't understand the instructions, or whatever problem you might think about? And maybe we need to pull that person from the sample. And a typical test that people use is really pretty simple. They look at, is that observation more than 3 standard deviations, or 3 z deviations from the mean? And if so, we really investigate that observation. If it's a survey where you can go back and look at the actual responses, or if it's a training diagnostic where you can go back and look at the actual responses, then you can investigate things better. So, outliers can occur. You can also sometimes spot them with histograms, although I'm not very good at deciding using graphics what's an outlier, what's not, unless I had someone way out here. Then I might say, yeah, that doesn't look right.
So that doesn't look like an outlier.
Yeah. Another histogram where we can investigate outliers. Box plots. One of the...
Looking at that last one, which one would be the outlier?
On this
40?
one, let's see, where's the mean? 36. So this one and this one might be outliers.
Okay.
But like I said, it's hard to tell with the graphs because you can see that they're both 4 units out, and they're both further out from the rest of the observations.
They're about the same height.
Yeah, they're about, it kind of looks like they are the same height or pretty close to it. So those two both might be something you would investigate.
That's good.
Personally, I think box plots are a little bit easier for finding these things. And one of the descriptive tests has the option to generate box plots, and I don't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but there will be one where you can check. Actually, by default, I think it does the box plots. So you can do box plots, and you can see the observations that look suspicious. And in this one is outside the normal range for this group. This, if I remember right, is the interquartile range. This one's above it. This one, SPSS is saying, is significantly above, or actually, I guess, below the rest of the observations. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the numbers. This is observation 43, this is observation 49. So it's saying 43 is way above the other stuff. 49 is at least somewhat above it. So you would then go and investigate those. And we have 51 down here that might need to be investigated. So box plots are an old tool. Back when people didn't have a lot of computer power, or if any, this was a real quick, easy way to illustrate what the data looks like. This one has an odd shape to it, but if you look at this one, your mean is right about here, your interquartile range, and so you can look at it and pick up some information pretty quickly. I haven't used them in so long that the only thing I really pay attention to are the unusual observations.
So everything outside the box plot are your outliers.
Yeah, they look like they might be outliers. You would want to investigate them to see if they are outliers or not. Now, what to do? Get rid of them. One thing you can do. Trimming the data is another thing, and the trimming the data is something that people in the past have done quite a bit to deal with outliers, because you're not just throwing away, say, ones at this end, but you're trimming the data on both sides, so it's balancing out. Winsorizing is a touchy topic. This is where you basically change values so that the outliers go away. I personally would not use that technique.
Just get rid of it.
Yeah, if I was going to do anything, I would trim the mean, trim the data set before I would do this. But there are people who say this is the most appropriate way to go. And they have their reasons, but when I've looked at those arguments, it just bothers me to actually go in there and change a value in my data set.
He didn't really mean to respond this way. He meant to respond some other way.
Yeah. I know more about their thought process or their learning than they do, so I'm going to put a value in there. Well, hey, why don't I just go in and do that for everyone?
Yeah.
I mean, why do you even need to get rid of it instead of saying we generalize this to the population, but it's the exception to the rule? You know, you obviously aren't going to ever be able to say 100% that this is how it is. So I don't understand why you would even,
I'll use,
other than address it.
I'll use, for my dissertation, I had, if I remember right, 3 outliers. One of them was a student who started on the study, was working through it, and then got to the end and said, I don't have a clue what I was doing on this. I couldn't really understand the instructions. I couldn't understand what you were asking me to do. And so that person, to a certain extent, had given up and just filled in responses that they then told me, I just filled things in because I didn't feel like it would be appropriate to leave things blank.
And you just chuck the whole thing out.
That throwing that out because it's not reliable, that makes sense. But for instance, if you are looking at test scores and you have one person who, you know, is way below average, removing that, I mean, I see a serious problem.
Yeah, and I had another one that wasn't too far out, so I didn't worry about them. But I had a third one that was way above everyone else. And so I went in and I was looking at how this person had responded to essentially the demographic and background questions that I was asking. And I discovered that this person had about a decade's worth of work experience in business. And so I thought, okay, this is not a typical student, but that's okay. I'm just looking for people who have not used these tools before. And so I made the decision to keep that one in because it was clear the person was different from students, but if I wanted to generalize beyond that.
And did you explain that that person was different based upon the demographic data you collected?
I had a little section in my description of my data where I talked about subject, whatever. Each one had a number, performed at such and such a level, but observing or reviewing the background questions, I found this person had 10 years of professional work experience and things like that. But I kept the person in there because, and so say, yeah, you have to explain those kinds of things. And for the one that I took out, I explained that this person approached me afterwards and said that they didn't understand and they just put random stuff in.
So if you do eliminate, you still explain why
you
chose to do that.
You need to be able to explain it. So otherwise, people at the defense are going to say, you know, you're going to have to go back and rerun all that with that person in there.
Right. Okay.
So, and I would say I'm a pack rep when it comes to data files. If I'm going to modify my data set, I make a copy with the data attached to the version, and then I modify the copy, pulling people out. So if I have to, I can go back to that previous version. But I'm obsessive about keeping copies.
Well, just one thing. This whole, what we're doing, this whole process, isn't it about predicting sometimes what elements or what answers could be? So couldn't you possibly, based on like the standard deviation, you look at a group and you say, they're answering it this way, this way, this way, this way. Couldn't you predict then what that answer might be? And they go, well, this one's 5 standard deviation points, standard deviations off of that, and say it should belong in this other group.
Yeah, if you're doing things like regression where you can make predictions, the only caveat here is regression predictions are only as valid within the range of the data you've captured.
Right.
So if you have one person who is significantly different in terms of things like work experience or education, it's hard to make predictions about the norm for that type of person. But if on the other hand, you have 10 people who are all similar in that respect, then you're more likely to be able to make a valid prediction there. So, and that's something a lot of times people, when they're doing statistics, they'll want to talk beyond the scope of the range of what the data covers. So if Steve, in his study with sexual harassment, the participants are 18 to 32, just to make up numbers, he could talk about people in that age range. On the other hand, it would be questionable if he talked about people who were, say, late in their military career, maybe they were 50, because there's a big gap between 32 and 50. So you have to frame your discussion within the data set that you have. Okay, so outliers, like I said, this one, that would bother me. Someone would have to really convince me that that would be the way to go. And that's it for the assumptions.